Hello, good afternoon. Hope you're all doing well. I'm Bing Quock, Assistant Director of the Morrison Planetarium at the California Academy of Sciences, and this is our night sky update. This is one of several ways that, since you can't come and visit the Academy of Sciences in San Francisco or the Morrison Planetarium, we'll come to you. We have several programs that we've got going during the week on a regular basis now. On Tuesdays, we've got a delightful program called Moon Explorers, where younger audiences can have a look at the moon and learn a little bit about it and take an imaginary trip to our nearest neighbor in space. On Wednesdays, we've got a solar system, a tour of the solar system using a piece of software that is an amazing three-dimensional model of the solar system, and you can fly around in it, or our presenter will fly around with it, but you might be able to suggest where he can go. So that's a fun presentation. And here on Thursdays, what we do is give you a preview of our nighttime sky. And the way we do that is we use a piece of software called Stellarium, which is a free download. You can get it from stellarium.org. You can also get it as an app, either for iOS or the Droid platform. Or if you don't want to download anything at all, you can go to that website, stellarium.org, and use the online web version. So there are lots of ways to use this. And if we look at the screen right now, this is the layout of Stellarium. This is a default view that I like to use because it shows the we've got our directions north, south, east, and west. And this, of course, is reversed from what you would see if you were looking at a map, where east is on the right-hand side and west is over on the left. Well, here we're looking up at the sky, so that swaps those two directions. And so just keep that in mind as we do that. You try to imagine holding your computer up over your head. That's a little difficult, but this is what the view would look like. And as we tour the nighttime sky for this evening, if you have any comments or questions, put them in the comments and we will try to get to them. Let's have a look at our night sky. We'll start with the sky as it is right now. The sun is high up in the south, but as we move through time, we're slowly going to see the sun move toward the west as it gets ready to set, so we can move through time in Stellarium. And what I'll also do is drag our view over so we can have a look in that direction. And as we move up closer and closer, we'll see the sun slowly dropping more toward the horizon, and the sky will gradually darken, and we'll start to see things appearing in the nighttime sky. And one of the first things that you'll see appearing there is a really bright object high in the west that is sometimes called the evening star, because it's a very bright object. In fact, it's at its brightest right now, and that happens to be the planet Venus. Now, Venus is, of course, one of the planets of our solar system. Sometimes it's called the Earth's twin, but it's about the same size as Earth, and it can be the brightest planet you see in the night sky. Now, it's outshined only by the sun or the moon, and right now Venus is at its very brightest. That's because of a combination of its distance from Earth and the phase that it's in. We're looking at Venus as it orbits around the sun. It orbits inside Earth's orbit, and so we can actually see it go through phases. Sometimes it's a full Venus. That's when it's on the other side of the sun, and sometimes we see it as a thin crescent. That's when it's on the same side of the sun as Earth. If we were to zoom in, if you have a pair of binoculars or a telescope, you might be able to see Venus looking kind of like a tiny version of the moon, especially if you've got a good pair of binoculars right there. This is what Venus looks like right now. It looks like a thin, tiny crescent, and you can even see that in the daytime if you know exactly where to look. But even with a pair of binoculars, Venus is large enough in the sky that you can make out that phase, so you can try that out. We're going to zoom back away from Venus, which can sometimes be so bright people really don't realize that they're looking at a natural object up there. So as we move through time, we're going to see Venus drop a little bit lower in the sky, and the sky will gradually darken. Wrong button. And let's let the sun set even lower. You'll begin to see a few stars appearing up there. Of course, there's one other thing that we can see up in that sky, and that is this object right here, high in the south tonight. That's the moon. The moon is at a first quarter phase. And so let's have a look at the moon. If you have a telescope or a pair of binoculars and you zoom up on the moon, this is what the moon looks like right now. So
Bing, I'm going to jump in here for a second. We seem to be having some delay issues with Stellarium. Can you
Oh,
refresh the
okay.
page?
Not easily.
We're still seeing the sun up and Venus on the horizon, but we will soldier on.
Okay, I have the moon on my screen right now, so I guess there's some sort of issue. I can restart the program if you think that'll help. Let me leave the program here. So you're going to see behind the curtain a little bit. So let me exit the program. And restart Stellarium.
While we're waiting, we had a question pop up. Can you see the International Space Station naked eye?
Oh, yes, Cheryl, yes, you can see it when it's passing over San Francisco. And the International Space Station is the biggest satellite ever built. It's about the size of a football field. It orbits Earth at about 230 miles above the ground. And so it's fairly low for satellites, and it's also very big, so it does reflect an awful lot of light. And sometimes it's even about as bright as Venus in the sky. So yes, you can definitely see the International Space Station when it passes over San Francisco. Now, Josh, can you see Stellarium again? I've got the opening view that I had earlier, and now I'm setting the sun. So it's dropping down to the west.
Okay, we're still seeing your view of Stellarium. A suggestion from one of our engineers who's on the stream that we try Stellarium in windowed mode, not full screen.
Okay, there's a windowed mode. Does
looks
that
good.
help any?
That looks like a nighttime sky. I think I see a Venus.
Okay, now your sound has cut out. I'm going to continue with my ramble here. We were looking at the moon earlier, and I hope you caught everything leading up to that. But the moon is high in the southern part of the sky. It's at its first quarter phase, and we can zoom up on what the moon would look like through a telescope or a pair of binoculars and have a look at its surface. You see half of its face illuminated directly by the sun, and this is what's called its first quarter phase. Now you can make out the dark maria, those are the dark patches here, and then the lighter colored areas, which are where most of the craters are found. These are called the highlands, and these dark areas are they're large flat plains of dried lava that bubbled up from underneath the crust and then spread out, cooled and hardened into these dark spots you see here. This one is the Sea of Serenity. In the middle is the Sea of Tranquility, and that's where Apollo 11 landed, right about there. And the Sea of Fertility is the third one. The isolated patch right here by itself is called the Sea of Crises, and you can see that pretty easily with a pair of binoculars, or if you have access to a telescope, it's a wonderful sight to behold. Now look at where the moon is tonight. The moon is going to be in a slightly different position tomorrow night because of a combination of the various motions of Earth and the moon. The moon appears to move about 12 degrees toward the east from one night to the next. It moves in very, very small increments, of course. And tomorrow night, look where the moon's going to be. Here's tomorrow night, right next to this star, which is called Regulus. It's a star that marks the heart of Leo the lion, which you see right here. We're going to let time pass just a little bit more so we can see the constellations and see the stars just a little bit better. And tomorrow night, if you're outside and if it's clear, you can see the moon and Regulus very close together there. Now, Regulus is a star that marks the heart of Leo the lion. It's almost on the same line that the sun, the moon, and the planets follow across the sky. And that line is called the ecliptic. It's really it marks the sun's path against the stars, if you could see the sun and the stars at the same time. And that's why sometimes the moon or the planets pass very close to Regulus, because it's right on that line. So watch for that. From month to month, you might be able to see some very interesting configurations of the moon and that star. Now, we'll go back to tonight's view. with Regulus to the west of, the moon to the west of Regulus. And here in the center part of the sky, straight overhead, we've got a good view of the springtime constellations and asterisms. The constellations, of course, are the traditional patterns that were imagined by ancient sky watchers thousands of years ago. There were figures like Ursa Major, the Great Bear, which you can see outlined right here. There are 88 constellations that were recognized by by astronomers today. This is just a few of them, maybe a third of them. And within the constellations, which can also include a number of faint stars, we can see brighter figures called asterisms, which are a bit easier to recognize. So here's an asterism within the Big Bear. This is the Big Dipper, as we call it here in the US. In other parts of the world, it's known as the plow, the wagon, the saucepan. Here in the US, we call it the Big Dipper, and it's famous for being able to indicate the North Star. These two stars at the end of the bowl of the Dipper point the way to a star called Polaris. And Polaris doesn't seem to move very much as night passes. It always stands right here as the other stars rotate around it. And it's the one star that stands above the North Point on the horizon. And so people have used that star to figure out what the directions are. It's a good navigational aid. We can use the same stars of the Big Dipper, point in the opposite direction away from the North Star. We come right down onto the back of Leo the lion, which I pointed out earlier. But here's what Leo looks like. This backward question mark is the head of the lion. The star Regulus is its heart. And the body of the lion stretches off toward the east and ends with this small triangle. A bright star called Deneb, or Denebula, is the tail of the lion. And so that's how you can use the stars of the Big Dipper to find one of the constellations of the zodiac, Leo the lion. And going to the other end of the Big Dipper, look at the handle here. Follow the curve of the handle, and you'll come to a star that has an interesting name. Follow the arc of the handle to the star Arcturus. Arcturus is a bright star in the constellation Boötes the herdsman. And it's supposed to look like a herdsman. Sometimes it's called the bear driver because he is supposed to be herding the great bear and the little bear, which is what the Little Dipper is also known as. He's supposed to be herding those two bears around the North Pole of the sky. It doesn't look much like a bear driver or a shepherd right there. Some people say it looks more like an old-fashioned kite right here, with Arcturus marking the spot where the long tail of the kite would be attached. So maybe that's one way to look at it. But one interesting thing about this star is that it is the brightest star in the entire northern half of the sky. And so it's a star that you can actually see in the daytime with a powerful telescope. It's very easy to spot. And after you follow the arc to Arcturus, you can use the mnemonic that astronomers like to use. Follow the arc to Arcturus and speed on to Spica. Spica is this star in Virgo the Maiden. Now, there are variations of this. Some people say drive a spike to Spica, but I like speed on to Spica down here. And this is the constellation of Virgo the Maiden, another one of the 12 constellations of the zodiac. And this is another way that you can use these sorts of mnemonics or devices that will help you remember the stars and their relationships to one another. We found the North Star by using the stars at the end of the bowl of the Big Dipper. We found Leo the lion, and we followed the arc to Arcturus and sped on to Spica. So from the Big Dipper, we found another constellation. We found the Little Dipper. We found Leo. We found Boötes and Virgo down here. So we've also we've spotted 4 additional star patterns just by using the stars of the Big Dipper as our starting point. As time moves on, you'll see that the sky does gradually move toward the west. So Venus has now set, and the bright area of stars where it was located has also set below the western horizon. The moon's a little bit lower, and by about midnight or so, Arcturus is at its highest in the sky. And we start to see a few new constellations appearing over on the eastern side of the sky. One of those is marked by a reddish colored star down here in the southeast. This reddish star is called
Before we jump too far from Arcturus, we had a question that came up.
Okay.
Michelle would like to know, how can we find Arcturus in the daytime? I thought stars were only visible at night.
Yes. You have to know which way to point the telescope. And so every star has a location. It's got a coordinate, just like San Francisco has a set of coordinates that you can use to locate it on the Earth's surface. The stars have coordinates as well, and these are what astronomers call right ascension and declination, but they tell astronomers where exactly to point their telescopes to see particular objects. And if you point your telescope at exactly the right spot where the coordinates of Arcturus are, then you'll be able to see that star. I visited Griffith Observatory in Los Angeles a number of years ago, and one of the items on the tour was a glimpse of Arcturus through their big telescope there. So it is possible. It can be done, but you got to know exactly where to point the telescope. It's not that easy. You have to have a telescope properly set up with those coordinates, but it can be done. So again, let's move on. We're looking at the sky of about, I guess about 3 a.m. now. And so we've got Arcturus moving over to the western half of the sky. We've got our Antares, which I was talking about earlier, which is the brightest star in Scorpius the Scorpion right here. And you can see the outline of Scorpius, and you can see it does look a bit like a scorpion, a bit like a hook. And a lot of different cultures named this after a scorpion. One group who didn't were the Polynesians, where they don't have too many scorpions on the islands, but they called this Maui's fish hook. And that relates back to a legend of how Maui pulled the Hawaiian Islands up from the bottom of the sea by using his giant fish hook. And you might remember hearing something about Maui and his fish hook in a recent movie, if you've been to the movies in the past few years. But that's Scorpius the Scorpion and the star Antares. Now, the name Antares means rival of Mars because Antares does have an orangish color to it, as does the planet Mars. And this particular constellation is also on the ecliptic. It's also very close to the path of the moon and the planets across the sky. So when Mars is in this same part of the sky, sometimes it can be confused for this star because the two are similar to each other in color. And that's why the star was called the rival of Mars. But looking over to another part of the sky, especially if you can get away from the lights of the city, and I don't know how easy that is right now, but away from city lights and away from what astronomers call light pollution, which is the glow put up into the sky by street lights and billboards and all sorts of lights from the city. If you get away from city lights, you can see this faint band of light crossing from north to south, and that is the band of the Milky Way. That's our own inside view of the galaxy in which we live. And the brightest part of the Milky Way is right here, where we see Scorpius the Scorpion and an asterism right behind it, which is part of Sagittarius the Archer. But a lot of people recognize the figure of a tea kettle right here, as if it's pouring water down onto the tail of Scorpius, with the steam of the Milky Way rising up from that. If you notice very carefully, the Milky Way runs right through this large triangle of stars, which is sometimes called the Summer Triangle. It consists of 3 stars, the brightest of which is called Vega in the constellation Lyra the Harp. The southernmost star is Altair in Aquila the Eagle. If you're a fan of science fiction movies, you might remember the name of the star Altair from Forbidden Planet. And then up near the northeastern corner of the Summer Triangle is Deneb, which is in the tail of Cygnus the Swan, which is sometimes also known as the Northern Cross, which you can see here. Now, again, let me bring up these patterns, these stick figures of the constellations, so you can sort of see how big these constellations are supposed to be and what they're supposed to look like. Not all of them look like what they're named after. Some do, but not all of them. These are 3 interesting stars. Vega here is so far away, its light takes 25 years to reach our eyes here on Earth. So that's a huge, huge distance. Altair is about 16 light years away, so its light takes 16 years to reach us. And Deneb is the farthest of all. It's about 2,600 light years away. So the very, very distant star there. And this triangle of 3 stars seems to point down toward the south to some transitory objects in our sky, these objects right here, which are some of the planets of our solar system. Two of them are very close together. Another one has just risen, and these are the planets Jupiter and Saturn. You see them close together in the early morning sky by about 3:30 or so. And just rising just after 3 o'clock is the red planet Mars. So those three planets are in our morning sky right now. Jupiter is the brightest of the three, and it is the largest of all the planets. It's about 500 million miles away from Earth, and it's very, very spectacular. Even through a pair of binoculars, you can see the disk of the planet. If you mount the binoculars on a tripod and hold them steady, you can see the four largest moons of Jupiter, the four largest of 79 known moons around that planet. And if you look at Saturn, well, binoculars won't show you the most famous feature of that planet. And those are something that can be seen only through a decent telescope. But if you look at that planet, if you look at Saturn, then you should be able to see what it's most famous for. When I was a kid, and my parents finally bought me a telescope, Saturn was one of the first objects I looked at, and that's what I saw through the telescope. The Saturn's rings, which make it a unique sight in the entire solar system. So that's Jupiter and Saturn, and not too far behind them, the red planet Mars here, just above the horizon. So sunrise tomorrow morning is at about 6:13 a.m. here in San Francisco, and it occurs gradually a minute or two earlier each day. So the days are lengthening, and with each new dawn, think good thoughts and be positive and be well. And let's have a look at whatever other comments we had here. So let me switch over to our other screen so that I can see what's going on. Can you recommend places in California for good stargazing? There are a number of places depending on how far away they are from city lights. A popular place is Mount Tamalpais, or there's Mount Diablo. Down on 280, there are certain dark areas near down by the reservoirs. A very famous spot for amateur astronomers is a little bit farther away, about 100 miles away, called Fremont Peak. And Fremont Peak is, they've got their own observatory there. Another good place is at Sugarloaf Ridge State Park. It's called the Robert Ferguson Observatory, and they have the largest publicly accessible telescope in the state. They've got a 40-inch reflecting telescope, and I don't know if, of course, you can't visit them right now, but when they're open, they have a great program. You can go there. But depending on what you want to see, there are lots of different places where you can go. If you want to see really faint objects like galaxies and star clusters, you might have to look for someplace really dark. But if you're just looking for things like members of our solar system, like the moon or the planets, any place you can get away from bright lights. If you can find a place that's shielded from bright lights, that doesn't ruin your night application, you might be able to see a few interesting sights there. Hello from your friends at Casper Planetarium. Hi guys, how are you doing? We hope that you're also doing well, that you're safely sheltering in place, and that you're able to bring your content to your visitors as well. So good to hear from you. Thanks a lot. Zandra asked, do I need an expensive telescope to enjoy the stars? No, you don't. People hadn't used telescopes for thousands of years up until 1610. All you have to do is let your eyes adapt to the dark, and that takes about 20 minutes or so. Pick a night where the moon is not at a bright phase. So before first quarter or after third or last quarter, so around the new moon, that's when the moon's light does not wash out faint objects from view. Again, get away from city lights if you can. At least get in the shadow of a building or someplace where bright lights are not shining directly at you. And as soon as you start to recognize the brighter asterisms, then you can go from there, like we use the Big Dipper to find the North Star, to find Leo the Lion, to find Arcturus and Spica. Once you learn your way around the brighter stars and star patterns in the sky, then you can graduate upward and have a look at the dimmer constellations and star patterns and test your eyesight that way. But you don't need a powerful telescope at all. I mean, only if you want to see certain features up close, like the moons of Jupiter or the rings of Saturn. But just to appreciate the night sky, nah, people have been doing that for thousands of years with the unaided eye. And that seems to be about it. So again, we want to thank you all very much for joining us for our night sky updates. And again, let me remind you, a lot of information about the night sky is available on the Academy's website in the planetarium section in the form of our Pocket Almanac, which has a downloadable version. And also the Academy's website has a quarterly sky guide, which talks a little bit in more detail about upcoming celestial events in the sky. So you can download those resources very easily. Also, log into our other events that are going on. Tuesdays, Moon Explorers. Wednesdays, a tour of the solar system. Thursdays, we'll give you our night sky update. And we hope you are well. We hope you're safe. And remember to keep looking up.